Well, good morning. I want to start with a super challenging question today. Do you have a wrong view of God, and is that affecting how you relate to everyone else in the world? That's my challenge. And whilst we're probably thinking no, John, I've been in the church hundreds of years. Let me challenge you. Paul warned the established Corinthian church in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 4 that it's possible to have another Jesus with another gospel and receive another spirit. That's the words he used. So you can have all of the religious language. You're talking about Jesus. You're talking about the gospel. You're talking about the spirit and even being affected by the spirit. And it's a completely different Jesus. It's not the words. It's the heart that's behind the words that matters. It's the understanding that we have of who that Jesus is. This is real challenging. Go look it up. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 4. But you can look through the whole Bible and people that actually really did have a relationship with God, but they misunderstood his heart. Even someone like Elijah, we were looking a couple of weeks back, real biblical hero, right? Calls fire down from heaven. And we saw that in Elijah's encounter later with God, God says to him, look, I wasn't in the fire. God's trying to show him that actually his heart is not to dominate people through acts of power. And we see that more clearly in Jesus in the New Testament. And we see the disciples of Jesus saying, yeah, we want to be like Elijah. Let's call down fire from heaven on that baddie village that didn't receive you. And Jesus rebukes them and says, you don't know what kind of spirit you're of. I didn't come to destroy the world, but to save it. And so in Jesus, in the gospel narratives, we get to see much more clearly what God is really like. And Jesus begins to challenge how we think about God. Now, I want to do a little experiment with you right now. I want you to turn with me in your Bibles to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25. And we're going to read from verse 14. And we're going to read a very famous parable. And after we read the parable, I want you to have a little conversation about what is this parable about. Famous parable, you've probably heard lots of talks on it if you've been around church for a while. But I want you to have a little conversation, what's it really about? All right, so Matthew's Gospel, chapter 25, from verse 14, the parable of the talents. Here we go. Father, speak to us through your word. Jesus said, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also who had received the 1 talent came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I've not sown and gather where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who is not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Wow. Super challenging parable. 1 minute, which I know is not long, to begin talking about, like, what's the central idea of this parable? What's it about? Go for it. All right, what did you get from this parable? I've heard so many talks on this over the years, right back from when I was at Catholic primary school. But generally, people tend to get the same basic principle from this, which is really around investment, like not just a talent of gold, which was like an amount of gold, kilograms or whatever, but like literally our talents. And the idea being that God's the master and there's a day coming when he's going to like hold you to account. What did you achieve in this life? And definitely I can see that principle of investment here, and it's true. You know, if you've got a gift, you don't use it, it tends to shrivel and wither. Don't use it, you lose it. And it's also true the opposite way. If you use a gift, it tends to increase. Like if you study, you don't just learn more stuff, you actually increase your ability, capacity to study. To whom has, more will be given. Like it's said here in this parable. However, I think when we come away from this parable thinking that the major point is like there's a judge who's going to judge us for productivity, we fall into the same trap as the lazy servant. Like think about it. If you're worshiping the God of productivity, whose premium value is productivity, what effect is that going to have on you? Like if you know that like he's going to judge you on how much you produced with your talent, like whether it be, I don't know, like social work, like how many poor hungry mouths are you going to feed? How many is enough? Like how many, if it's evangelism, how many souls are you going to save and reach out to? Like if it's visiting in prison, like how many is enough? And like I see in the church, when like this lazy guy, we've got this idea that God's this like harsh taskmaster whose primary value is productivity. The effect on the church is driven, guilty workers who either become passive and give up or overstretch themselves and burn out. And I see this like, and so we end up like filled with guilt and condemnation. We teach it to our kids, day of judgment coming, kids, gotta get ready. So they're terrified and paralyzed by fear, or overdriven by fear. And this like toxic fear ends up producing timid, anxious servants like this guy, and it's counterproductive. And I see this play out in different ways in my own life and in church history. So church history, I was hearing this week, like this documentary about these televangelists in the 1980s. And like, these guys were maxed out, like super productive. Premium value on productivity, like mega ministries, mega churches, multi-million-dollar television stuff, like the whole shindig. Like they were maxed out productive. And in a culture like America where productivity's king, like it was like a big tick, you know, big check for a big tick. But Like the documentary tracks how like one after the other of these like majorly productive guys fell in different types of scandal and corruption. And what was interesting to me is like when one guy would fall, like he'd have an affair with his secretary, the other guys on their TV channels would be trumpeting like condemnation, judgment, like that guy's such a failure, such a disgrace to the ministry, like, oh my gosh, he's a pariah. And the loudest voices of all, like within a few months, they'd be caught in a motel room, like with a prostitute or something like that. Even worse scandals, like it's classic, judge not, lest ye be also judged, you know? But what was interesting to me is how quickly condemnation would come from the mouths of these guys to the others that fell. And it struck me that when productivity is your premium value, guilt is what's going to be driving you on the inside. Am I enough? Am I enough? And if I'm not, I got to keep going. I got to do more because the day of judgment coming, and I want to make sure I'm productive enough. And so like guilt and condemnation would come from these guys is because that was what was already on the inside of them. And here's the thing, like when productivity is your premium value, you will push past people, even trample upon them in order to be productive for the sake of the ministry or whatever it is. You know, like you'll put your kids, your wife, your husband, your relationships, your friends, all of that is there to be used to produce, to serve the goal of being more productive for the sake of the kingdom, because we serve the God of productivity. And when relationships are less important than productivity, what that does in our soul is it creates a vacuum. Where now like we're desperate like for like belonging and significance, all those things that come from healthy relationship, that sense of value and worth. So now we've got to be even more productive to make up for that vacuum. And it makes us incredibly vulnerable when someone comes with a pretty smile to fall bam into sin, into temptation, because we've neglected the relationships that were meant to feed us. Because productivity was our goal. And productivity was our God. Now, like you can see that like writ large in the big scandals, and there are hundreds of those. And I think it's undergirded by a theology of fear and guilt and condemnation. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand me. Many of those televangelists, they preach love and they preach forgiveness and they preach grace. But on the inside, there's that God of productivity that we're still terrified of. And so like, I don't know, like for all your theology, like, oh, I don't think like those guys. Can you see how in your life you might be driven by the God of productivity? Like this kind of like came alive to me like the other day when I was cooking tuna pasta. Now tuna, we know, comes in little tins, right? You need a tin opener to open like the tin of tuna. And so I said to Nicola, like we had a problem with the tin opener. Did you get a new tin opener? She says, no, I didn't get a new tin opener. The one we got's fine. And so I got the tin opener. The one we got is not fine. Like it's the opposite of fine. And so I'm cooking the dinner and I'm trying to open the tuna. And like the thing won't turn. And so I have to like puncture like each like bit, each hole of this tin or 3 tins of tuna, like one at a time. Like each little bit, and like every time I puncture a bit more of the brine like squirts out into my eye or on my top, and I'm just getting super annoyed. Like I'm just trying to like get through this thing as quick as I can, and I feel like I just want to throw the tuna against the wall. And God speaks to me. He says, John, how about you show a little bit of patience and just gently move the thing round slowly. Why are you in such a hurry to get the meal done? I'm like, yeah, I guess I could go a little slower. And then he said to me, John, like, you're like that tin opener. There are some things you're just slow at. And I know you want your brain to function like this person or that person. Well, it doesn't. And I watch you become frustrated and like push yourself beyond what you're capable of. And, either like give up at times and overdrive yourself at others. John, it's got to stop. Because I've designed all people to function best in a spirit of patience and perseverance. Isn't that profound? I've designed all people to function best in a spirit of patience and perseverance. Like often the God we're coming under is the God of Pharaoh. It's the accuser. It's not the God of patience and perseverance. And so like the major lesson from this parable that I believe Jesus wants us to get is that when we misunderstand what God is like, it actually paralyzes us. It destroys our ability to be productive and to really reveal who we are. So like if you look at the words of the lazy guy, he's like, Master, verse 24, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. That's not true. It's what he believes. But the master wasn't harsh, wasn't hard. Like he gave to each one according to his ability. And he knew this one over here, a little bit weak. I'm just going to give him this much. And he's comparing himself to this guy and like, no wonder he became paralyzed. The master doesn't reap where he hasn't sown. Like he's sowing, he's giving the 1 talent. And sometimes we become paralyzed because as Christians, instead of worshiping the God of patience, the God of mercy, like I say, we're worshiping the God of Pharaoh. All right, there's something else I want us to understand from this. We become like the God we worship. And if you worship a God who you think's a harsh taskmaster and you're getting ready for condemnation for most of the world at the end of the age, if that's the God you worship, you will become a harsh taskmaster to yourself and those around you. Like we see this in the parable. Like this guy, the lazy guy, he believes that the master is a harsh taskmaster. And so like he internalizes that and he condemns himself before the master ever comes. His judgment is, you're not capable of doing anything with this 1 talent. Buries it. We become like the God we worship, for better or worse. And what I really want to leave you with today is this. God is not a harsh taskmaster. Like it says here, he gave to each one according to his ability. And what I want you to understand, what I want every single one of us to understand, is that God designed each of us uniquely. He knows who you are, and his great longing for you is that the glory of who you are would be revealed in the world. That's his goal. That's the reward at the end, that you will be you. That's the goal. And that everything that is minimizing the glory of you would be removed. Because you were designed in the foundations of the world as a perfect, unique revelation of Jesus Christ. The reward is you being free to be you. That's all he wants. A revelation of the love of God through you. All right. So the good news is that the master hasn't left for the day of judgment. The good news is that the Spirit of God is with you and with me right now. And he's the best judge. So what I want you to do right now is to ask God, God, who am I? Because like he gives to each one according to their ability, right? Like, and he knows what your ability is. He knows how he's framed you. He knows what he loves about you. So ask him, God, what do you love about me? Who am I? See what he says, write it down, and see how you can express that this week. 1 minute, listen to God. All right, well, church, I hope I'm confronting some stuff in how we think about God. You do not serve a harsh taskmaster. You serve a loving Father whose greatest desire is to see his sons and his daughters free to fully reveal all that he's created them for. God bless you, church. You are so loved. Have an amazing week.